Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Terrible Leader, where real leaders share the raw truth about the lessons they learned the hard way, so you don't have to. Join our host, Lacey Nelson, founder of Transcend Leadership Collective and former terrible leader. Every leader can become worthy of being followed if they are willing to put in the work. On this podcast, we share the messy stories and behind-the-scenes reality of what the work actually entails. We welcome you to this community of revolutionary leaders who believe honest communication, healthy conflict, and building cultures of acceptance, respect, and trust are not only possible, but non-negotiable for cultivating world-class teams.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. I am your host, and let's not forget, former terrible leader, Lacey Nelson. Thank you, listeners, for coming back week after week. Boy, do we have a good conversation in store for you today. I am thrilled to introduce Donna Temm. She is an author. She is a speaker, and I have so many questions. She is a coach for high performers, specifically those that have experienced trauma. She is a trauma-informed coach for us type A's. I'm sure I got a lot of you listening. I know I definitely identify as falling within her demographic. Donna, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Lacey. I am so happy to be here, and I'm looking so forward to our conversation we're going to have.
Well, I've got so many questions. Okay, you must have quite the journey, the story. I don't think you wake up one day and go, I think I want to really help these high performers that have experienced trauma without having some kind of amazing backstory yourself. How did you get to this point in your journey, in your career?
Yes, you are right. And it has been quite a journey, and it's been a long journey, and it has not always been an easy one. You know how they say you're always going uphill, 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 and there's got to be a downhill somehow where you can kind of put it on coast, right? And I think that as a high performer, high achiever myself, I have had a background in trauma. And so that's sort of where the story begins, is that I did experience childhood abuse. We're getting right into it, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And we're just going for it.
We're going for it. But it's a big part of my story. And so for many, many years, the memories were repressed. And what ended up happening was I grew. And as I grew as a person. And I realized that there were certain things that I needed to have in my life a certain way, i.e. the high achiever and the high performer, right? And so, it was like, well, is this a control thing? And if so, why? So there were a lot of questions for me. And then there were, again, I'll give you the short cliff notes about it, but I was an educator.
Okay.
And I was in the public school system. And I was really drawn for some reason to those students who were struggling and who were struggling in a particular way, not just their learning, but with their social and emotional needs and their well-being.
Oh, yeah.
And I was so drawn to them. And it was actually triggering for me, but I didn't know why. And I found myself really throwing myself into these kids' lives beyond just being their teacher. And then we had this amazing, and I think it was called No More Secrets. And it was a play that they were putting on for these kiddos at our school. And so we went to the play, and there was one specific child that they knew something was happening. And so they said, can you keep an eye on her? And I said, absolutely. But I found myself sort of like I'd stopped breathing and I was really struggling to get through this whole piece. And so I realized that there was something bigger going on for me, not just these kids. And so I'm just going to fast forward to then being thrown into what the reality of my life had really been. And so I realized that I too had been abused as a child, and it went on with a near-death experience before it all ended.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was a lot to it.
Yeah.
But then I got the help that I needed, which was so important. And so I continued to go on, but there was this soft spot within me for those who who really needed the help.
Yes.
Because I was them at one point in my life.
Yes.
And I felt like I knew what they needed, even if it wasn't the specifics. I had a basic understanding of what it was they needed. And so then I left teaching and I went in to start my own business because I had been ill. I was in a sick building and nobody knew. So all this was kind of going on simultaneously, right?
Yes.
But, everything for a reason. And so it pushed me out of that. And I went into alternative therapies. I became a licensed massage therapist. And so as I started working with individuals doing that, and then eventually energy clearing and other alternative therapies, everyone had a story. And whoever was coming in to see me, there was some element of trauma. And it was just amazing because, we can say that trauma is chronic stress and we can say that it's grief or shock or loss or abuse. I mean, there's a lot that encompasses the trauma. And there's the big T traumas that we talk about that we may get into later. So that is in a very short nutshell, how I really started to get into this type of work to work with other people.
It sounds like it found you. I don't think you could have really avoided this work. It sounds like it absolutely found you as much as you found it.
You are right about that. Absolutely. Yes. And there are even times in my, because I've been in business for 20 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And there were times when I was like, I think I just need to get out of this. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah.
And it just, every time I tried to get out, something will pull me back in. And there I was again.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You brought something up that I wanted to dig into a little bit deeper for context for our listeners. Trauma is a word that I think gets thrown around a lot. And I don't know that we all understand what it means. And so I appreciate that you said there's big T trauma, there's little T trauma. The way I have come to understand trauma and what trauma is it's, and you please, I'm asking for correction and redirection if I don't have this or we're not aligned in our understanding, because I'm certainly not the expert in this field. So trauma is, you and I could both go through the same experience. Let's say we witness a car accident and you could walk away with no trauma from that, shaken up, but you don't necessarily have a traumatic experience. Whereas I could walk away with deep trauma from witnessing exactly the same thing because of the way I process the experience internally. Trauma is what happens to us inside and our response to the external stimuli, which also is how I understand why some kids from the same family can have radically different experiences in the same household growing up. Am I on the right track here?
Absolutely. You so are. There's so much truth. And I think, if we want to expand upon that a little bit, I think that we can also have a discussion around nature versus nurture, right? What is in our DNA? What is it that we have seen in our lives? What have we experienced in our lives up until that point of the trauma? Maybe the car accident, right? And so what's happening with our nervous systems and what condition are our nervous systems in? If somebody goes into a car accident and they pretty much got a balanced life, there may be some trauma there or some upset, but it may be very different than someone who goes into the same car accident and has already had things happen in their lives where they are hypersensitive or hypervigilant, and their nervous system is definitely going to speak to them in a very different way.
That makes so much sense. I think that's the first time I'm putting those dots together with the capacity that you have going into the situation. What is it about high performers? I'm speaking not from a study, but just from my personal experience. There are a lot of high performers that have had traumatic experiences. Is it a higher proportion than the rest of society, or am I just imagining that correlation? How are they connected? Is that real?
It's funny because I don't have actual numbers, so I couldn't really speak to that and be able to say, let's note this reference or let's note that reference. But what I will say is that a lot of times when people come in and they have had the big T traumas, that is when I see there's more of a sense of I need to be in control. And if I'm performing at a higher level and if I'm achieving at a higher level, I got my finger on the pulse. I'm going to know what's going on and I'm going to be able to have my needs met, whatever that may be. And that's the thing. Everybody has these different needs other than our needs for food, clothing, shelter, love, all of that. We also have these needs where some of us really have to have certainty in our lives. Whereas other people, it drives them absolutely crazy to have certainty in the same structure all the time. They need variety. Then there are others who are going for growth opportunities. And then there are others who need to be very significant. So we all have our different needs that need to get met that are important to us. And so if we have trauma and then we have certain needs, the way we react to that trauma is going to be a little bit different. Like I'm more of I need that certainty. And so I'm going to have my little schedule and I can veer from it. Absolutely can. But I need to know at the end of the day for me to regroup and catch my breath. I've got that little bit of structure underneath me. Whereas other people are more adventurous. They're like, look, I can't do this. I need to have something else that I'm thinking about rather than what my reality is. So I'm going to be adventurous. I'm going to give myself something new to think about all the time. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It sounds like there's different coping mechanisms. It's different ways that we're coping with the stress. And at some point for anybody's coping mechanism, when taken to the extreme, it no longer serves us well or is healthy.
And that's exactly it.
I want to back up just a tiny bit. What is big T trauma versus little t trauma?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
The big T trauma, and if people want to know more information about that too, there's what's called the ACEs.
Yes.
And I know that you know all about that as well.
Yep.
Adverse childhood experiences. And there's a whole list. So people can definitely look that up. One of them is absolutely abuse. That is a big T trauma. And in my work, that's the one that I bump up against the most is either the abuse or there's neglect. And, sometimes we can say, well, neglect, is it really neglect if A happens or B happens? But again, I want to circle back to what you said in the beginning about it's how it's perceived.
Right.
We can have all these things that we can maybe fit people into boxes about what is really big T and little t.
Right.
One of the things that I always try to do is I try to look at the individual as a whole person and say, okay, even if it's, some people will come and say, it's just chronic stress. Well, it's just chronic stress, but it's different for you because of what you bring to the table.
Right.
And where you're at this time in your life. So it may be chronic stress that is really, really tearing down relationships. That's a big trauma for people as well, is when their relationships are falling apart. There's just so many different ways to look at it and so many different things that we need to take into consideration. And I feel like part of the way that I work is to do exactly that. It's to look at individuals for who they are and to really look at them as a whole person. Because if you don't know the whole person, you really can't help them in the way that they need to be helped.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Knowing that a lot of our listeners, they are running teams. And when we're coaching and helping people learn how to be better leaders, one of the things we like to remind them about is that their people are walking through the door with coping mechanisms that have served them well in some point in their life.
Yes.
They might not be serving them well anymore, but at some point in their life, thank you, past self, you kept me alive. We don't need to do this anymore. They may not be doing that work that they need to be doing. They may not even have the awareness, which is like step one for change, right?
That's right.
They may not even have the awareness that that's happening, but you're the supervisor, you're the boss, you're the owner of the company. And it's ridiculous to think people are going to leave their baggage at the door when they come in. In fact, you can unintentionally be exceptionally triggering depending on what baggage they're bringing in with them to some of those patterns without you even knowing it.
Yes.
So
yes.
Recognizing that as leaders, our job is we're not therapists, we're not counselors. We need to not try to take those roles on. I do see really compassionate, empathetic leaders sometimes go so far the other direction in that they are actually, they're way out of their scope, way out of their lane. It's like asking your dentist about, treat my liver cancer, right? Your dentist isn't going to know how to do that, and nor should your dentist try. If they do, run away fast. So what advice do you have for those of us? We can see it. We can recognize there's some patterns here. We maybe know enough about it, have enough history in it, but we're not in that role. Even if we were trained, it's not an appropriate relationship.
Right. Absolutely.
What feedback do you have for us in navigating those waters? I feel like a large portion of the population is just walking around with gaping wounds right now.
Yes.
That are oozing all over everybody.
Yes, I would agree with you on that. Absolutely.
What wisdom do you have for those of us that are just trying to navigate, be empathetic, be good leaders, knowing that we've got teams full of wounded people, but we're not in the counselor seat? Do you have any insight into that?
I really do, because I see this a lot. And I think that sometimes we expect a lot from our leaders. And we have to remember that our leaders are our leaders in a specific realm because they have specific skills that make them a leader in that realm.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that they have the emotional ability to really reason why maybe the people that they are managing are behaving as they are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think number one, we really have to look deeper at the people that we're working with. And it doesn't mean that you have to know what's going on, but I think sometimes just being approachable and recognizing, instead of imposing upon them, well, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this, without getting any information first. I think sometimes having that conversation where it's an open conversation where you can be approachable and they feel safe enough. It's a safe enough environment for them to confide in you. Now you have a little bit more knowledge what's going on. And then I really feel like as a leader, if you can have at least a general knowledge of, if A happens, what is a resource for A that I can send them to? Because you're right. You've got to stay in your own lane. And so if B happens, what is a resource that I can lead this person to? And so it's really about having not the deep expertise in every single area, but instead having the ability to have those communication skills with those that you're working with. And then really a big piece of it is that we are so resilient. All of us are so resilient if we are given what it is we need. If we are given the ability to feel like we're cared about and cared for, not taken care of, that's enabling, right?
Right.
We don't want to enable anyone, but we do want to give them a chance, especially in the professional world, because if you hired this person, there was a point in time you saw value in them.
Right.
So it's like, okay, if something is off right now, let's look back. Let's find out what's off. Why is it off? Is there a way that I can help them? And then really getting to know what their strengths are, what their challenges are, and then setting them up for success. And then reevaluating as you're doing. And this is for anyone really, right? Anyone that we're working with, whether it's trauma or not. But we want to reevaluate, and then we want to just continue to get them to that next level. And I think as leaders, that's what we want to do. We want to get the person to the next level because it's going to benefit not only the business or whatever service or whatever is being provided, but it's also going to benefit that person. The more we have people living healthier lives, both physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of those things, that shifts our world. It's that 6 degree of separation, right? And that ripple effect. Anybody that we can really add some value to their life, it is going to impact however many people they come into contact with, which will impact each one of those people with whoever they come into contact with.
And I think one of the things that we've noticed when we're coaching leaders, we develop curriculums for leadership academies in multiple organizations, very large companies down to a family farm. And one of the things that we always include is teaching emotional intelligence, which is staying within our lane, staying within our scope. But even just having that understanding of where to even begin with self-awareness is so empowering to so many people. And I think it's easy when we're interested in this stuff. If you're listening to this podcast, you picked it out because you're like, oh, something about trauma, like there's something in you that you're already interested in this stuff. You likely have a background. This is likely not your first rodeo hearing about these concepts. But I think we can forget and get blinded to, if this interests us, most of the population has no idea about even the base level of what it takes to actually become self-aware. And then what do you do with it? And emotional regulation and central nervous system regulation. They are not in touch with that. So even just offering the knowledge and the starting point and the ability to assess as part of training within the context of leadership, what we're finding is that we're getting them coming back with all of these success stories that are happening, not just within their teams, but in their homes.
Yes.
And when they can connect, my job made my life at home better because they cared about me and helped me get this skill set. Talk about a massive connection, value add. It does so much. I mean, obviously, you're going to keep them longer. It's going to benefit their engagement. They're going to have more of a loyalty to the organization. But when we're doing it from the place of that's what we want, they can feel it.
Absolutely.
It feels icky.
Absolutely.
But if you're doing it from the place of we want to make your life better and we're investing in you, and I think if you learn this stuff, it's going to help you at work. And of course, we want that. But we also acknowledge we want your life at home to be great too.
Yes.
If you have authenticity in that, oh my gosh, sky's the limit for potential in developing your people and your relationships.
I totally agree. And if I can circle back a little bit, I also feel like we have to remember when we have our leaders out there, we have to remember that our leaders are humans too.
Oh, yes.
And so our leaders don't necessarily have the emotional intelligence themselves. They've got beautiful skills. They've got amazing expertise, but they don't always have that. And a lot of times as high achievers and high performers, there was something that pushed them to that level.
Yes.
So there may be, again, some trauma behind it, however you want to define that. So I think that for me, professional development is so important from top down and bottom up. And I think it's just really, really important to give every single person the support they need at the level that they need it and meet them where they're at.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
What are the common threads? You're working with high achievers, type A people all day long. You get a whole room full of me, which the energy in there, I cannot even imagine what the energy is like in your space. I'm sure it's amazing. And I'd be buzzing. What are some commonalities? Or I guess as a person that's listening to this and they're like, I'm a high achiever. I'm totally identifying with all the things that are being talked about. But I don't know. Am I impacted by trauma? Am I not? Do you have any checkpoints or internal reference points? How do we know? How do we move from like, I think maybe to like, oh yeah, I actually am impacted by trauma. What advice do you have for that person that's just kind of starting that journey and healing and figuring out, oh man, yeah, I am holding on. That's me. I need to raise my hand. What do they need to know to raise their hand with confidence and say, I'm impacted and I need help?
You know, I think there are so many answers to that. I am going to say that, and I don't know if this is a right or wrong answer, to be honest with you. But it's what my experience was. And it was, don't go digging if there's nothing to dig for. Right? Because if you're doing okay, if you're walking through life and you have the normal upsets and you have, you know, these certain feelings or these certain emotions, but you're still able to walk through life and it's not detrimental to you or those around you, you know, then don't dig. But the minute you start seeing, wow, I feel like I'm losing my sense of self. I feel like I have these fears that I cannot make sense of. I feel like I'm having these thoughts, but I don't have any idea where they're coming from. And they're not uplifting thoughts. It may be that they've been so externally involved in someone else's drama and trauma. And they've now decided, I don't know where they end and I begin. And a lot of times that's what happens is that we can resonate with that. And so now we lose ourselves. A lot of the high performing, high achievers, one of the things that they typically notice is that they've lost their sense of self. And I tell people, because trauma, it can be frightening.
Oh yeah.
Some people are like, I don't want to know.
Yeah, I don't want to touch it.
That's right. And that's okay. Again, if you are not going down the tubes,
right,
or doing that to somebody else.
Right.
You know, I always say, look, if you want to be where you're at and your, you know what, isn't negatively rolling onto other people, absolutely fine. But the minute you really are starting to impact yourself in a really not good way and then hurting others, you really have to sort of take a look.
You got to deal.
You really do.
Yeah.
And I think if I can say one thing, because I know that there are going to be some people that will be listening, and this I see a lot. And there are some people who will be listening and say, oh my goodness, I had that. I felt that way. Oh, something like that kind of happened. And they're going to say, did it happen to me? And I want to say this. The answer may be yes. The answer may be no, because we can have all the same emotions, right? We can have anger. We can have fear. We can have disappointment. We can have all those emotions, but it doesn't all lead to the same source. I might be angry about one thing, but you're angry about something different.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that we have that commonality.
Right.
Of what that source was.
Right.
So I always caution people about that because I don't also want people running scared.
Right.
I want them to just know if you feel, and you will, there'll be a time when it's going to hit you and there's going to be this little light bulb moment and you're going to go, something is not right. And it's really not right.
Yes.
And that's when I say to people, get support right away. If it is someone that you trust and you just say to them, I've got to tell you something. I trust you. Please do not let this pass through your lips ever. And then you just say, because sometimes we can get a handle on what we're thinking by listening to others or hearing ourselves say it out loud versus just that cycle in our heads going over and over again. So I would definitely say, get help. And then if you're like, okay, that didn't really help me, it's making me wonder more, then get professional help.
Right.
And I think it's so important. And, you know, people all have their different reasons for not wanting to get that professional help. And I would ask them to please just really look at the reasons why a little bit more deeply, because boy, when big T trauma does hit, it hits hard. And if you think you're going to do it alone, you're probably not going to do very well with that.
Right. I really don't want to try to do surgery on myself.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Absolutely.
Well, Donna, I want to transition us a bit and invite you in to the confessional to step in and give us, in your amazing story, what is one of the mistakes that you're willing to share today in this journey? Let's hear it.
Okay, here we go. You ready?
Oh, I'm so ready.
Okay. And I don't think anybody's going to be shocked about this, but I call this chapter in my life the mindfulness leader.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm so invested already. All right.
Yeah. And so really what it comes down to is that I was running my business all heart. Wasn't using my head. I had so much compassion for people. I had such an investment in seeing people get well, in seeing people live the lives that they wanted to live, that I was so outside of myself that I didn't even realize what was going on internally for me. Because I was too heart-centered and invested. Now, that being said, you know, it doesn't mean that I don't believe you should be heart-centered.
Right.
Because I think that that's why we do it, because we have this heart-centered passion. It's what we love. It's what makes us tick. It's what makes us want to help other people. But at the same time, I had this wonderful, and oh my goodness, I am so grateful to him because I had an accountant who had done a lot with business. And so he was also my business advisor, and he took me under his wing at a very early start in my business. And I'm so grateful to him. And I think every gray hair he has on his head today has my name somewhere on it, because he used to say to me, Donna, this is all great, but you need to use your head too. You're in business. You're not getting an automatic paycheck like you did when you were teaching. And he's like, you know, we used to talk about billable hours and we used to talk about all these things. And I was just like, nope. I add extra time in case somebody's processing and they need the extra time. You know, and so the other thing was I felt like it was my journey and it wasn't my journey. Right? It was their journey. And what I had to realize was that this was their journey, that I was there to help support them through,
Yes.
not do it for them.
Yeah, you can't do it for them.
You can't. But at that time,
it's a ticket to burnout.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And I was getting to the point where I was putting in more time, effort, and resources than some of my clients were because they weren't ready.
Yes.
They weren't ready yet.
Oh, you're speaking my language. Yes. Yes.
Right?
I cannot work harder than you do. When you're my client, if I'm working harder than you, we're not going to keep working together.
Right. Exactly. And, and the other thing is too, is that money.
Yeah.
Money was just like flying out the window because I had some overhead. I mean, it was low. It was low at the time, but I still had overhead.
Yep.
And people would come in and some of them were in a state of crisis.
Right.
And so they didn't have a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not turn them away. And it's not that I want to.
Right.
But what I was doing was I was keeping my prices very low.
Mm-hmm.
And then when people would come in, I would reduce their prices for them, my fees. And then some, I'd give them free.
So you had like negative margins.
I had negative margins. And I don't know how I did it for 20. I don't know why I'm still in business after 20 years.
Yeah.
But, I think that was for me, it was probably a time in my life where I was not a great leader. I was a very compassionate leader.
Right.
But I was an enabler. I don't even want to say the word, right?
Yeah.
I was an enabler.
Yeah.
It's what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it's okay, but it's not okay to continue when you're aware of it.
Right.
Like you said earlier,
Yep.
Awareness is the big thing before you can change it. And it had to hurt first.
Mm-hmm.
It had to hurt my purse strings.
Mm-hmm.
It had to hurt my pride sometimes.
Yep.
I mean, it had to hurt in ways in order for me to finally say, okay.
Yeah. I wish pain wasn't such a great teacher, but dang, is pain a great teacher.
Yep.
So definitely wakes us up.
It does.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking about my own journey and I'll be in 10 years in business next year.
Oh, good for you. Congratulations.
About 6 months from now. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so looking at my old pricing, what I used to charge, and I think we all have to learn that lesson, especially when we're in a helping field, right?
Yeah.
We're also helping. We're helping people that are in a very different vein, but are leaders and they're running their companies and they're feeling overwhelmed and they need all of this help. And it's so easy to go out of scope of what the agreed upon work was. Scope creep happens all the time. And if you're not vigilant, and also recognizing that you do need to set at some point. Once you're past your baby years, your initial building up your social proof, building up okay, we can do this, your test cases. When you're over that hump, you got to recognize it soon enough that, you know what, I've got to change now because it really is to benefit more people because A, I'm going to have to lay people off from my team if I can't afford them.
Right.
Because I'm not charging the right prices. And B, it's going to limit who I can help in the future if the business disappears.
That's it.
And you're not going to be for everyone. You can't be for everyone.
That's right.
It's learning to give yourself permission for that and to really understand. And now we have a floor for minimum engagement. I'm not going to take on a project unless it's a certain amount because the margins just aren't there. The return on the time it takes is not there. And learning where that was and when it makes sense for, okay, maybe we're not the right fit for you, but let me refer you to someone who is, or to the Small Business Association. There's tons of free resources.
Yes.
But I had to learn that the painful way as well. So you're speaking my language.
Okay.
I'm hearing you.
We're on the same page. Absolutely. Yes.
And such a valuable piece of information to share for business owners, especially those owners that are in the helping professions that are hyper compassionate. And sometimes we'll see this same concept manifest when you get so invested in the success of one person, but it's at the detriment to the rest of the team.
Right.
So when they're your team member.
Absolutely.
And realizing that if you're repeatedly sacrificing the good of the many for the benefit of the one or the few, it's your issue as a leader and you have to reorient where you're laying your priorities.
I agree, because what happens then is even the most compassionate people then the morale goes down.
Oh,
when they see this happening, and people notice. Don't think people aren't noticing what you're doing, what you're saying. When you think they're not noticing, they're noticing.
They're probably noticing before you're noticing,
That's
honestly.
right. That's right. Absolutely. And so I think that's such a valid point, because I think one of the biggest things, and again, it's not always about the bottom line, obviously, productivity, efficiency, all of that stuff, but it impacts the bottom line. If your morale is not there, people, if they feel like they are cared about and they are valued, they are going to go way beyond what their salary or hourly wage is for you.
Yes.
But the opposite too is if they feel like, why bother? They're not going to bother.
They're really not. I think what we're starting to see, it's so fascinating. The generation, probably our generation, a little bit older, they're starting to recognize there is just not loyalty to business just coming in the door for almost anyone that is a really young millennial or a Gen Z.
Yeah.
Whereas before, people would be like, oh, I just want to work for this company. That reality is disappearing if it's not entirely gone. And it's so interesting when that is gone, that requires an extra level of being equipped as an excellent leader, because they don't care what label you're wearing from what company. They care about how their work can be integrated into the rest of their life, and how does it make them feel to show up, and do they want to be there?
Right.
And if they don't, they're going to bounce.
Yeah.
Whew, all of that's a lot. And we're definitely over time, so I want to respect your time. This has been such a good conversation.
I love it. I've had so much fun.
Yes. Wrapping that into just bringing us back around to understanding ourselves as leaders is more critical than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And I would say you have more of an impact on whether your people are going to stay or go than ever before. And if you have that voice that says you need to do something, you're not okay, you've been trauma impacted, listen to it and reach out.
Yes.
Because you cannot lead well if you're not dealing with your own stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just can't. And if you're a business owner, nothing, including parenting, which is saying a lot. I'm parenting a teenager now. Nothing has surfaced my own stuff more than owning a business.
That's right.
Including parenting. There's something about that business ownership that is just...
There really is.
It's just incredible for surfacing the good and the bad.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree. I have a program that I developed, and the first module for that program is all about the person. Before they even learn any other skill to work with someone else.
Yep.
They have to look at themselves first, because they're going to be triggered.
Yep.
They are. It's not if, it's when.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. It is not if.
Yeah.
You are getting into this game, you are going to be triggered.
You got
many, many times. So get some skills.
There you go. Absolutely.
Donna, if they want to find you, we will drop everything in the show notes. So please send us all your links. But generally, what is the best way to get a hold of you? How do we find your book?
Oh, yes.
Where do we go for the Donna experience?
Right. Okay. Well, probably the quickest way to get my book would be Amazon.
Okay.
And it's You're Only as Sick as Your Secrets.
Excellent.
And then to reach me, they can go to donnatemm.com.
Okay.
Or they can reach me. I'll give you everything else. I'm on LinkedIn.
Excellent.
I'm on Facebook. I have a Gmail, email. There's a contact page on my website. So there's lots and lots of ways people can reach me.
Okay.
I have a lot of freebies that I give out.
Nice.
If they're interested and they feel like they need something, but they don't have a whole lot of money, don't let that be a detriment to them.
They can start taking action today by just downloading some of the stuff you have for them.
There you go. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Donna, thank you so much. You've been a tremendous guest. This has been such a valuable conversation. I think we could keep going for hours, but
I think so.
In all fairness to you and our listeners, I will say goodbye. And listeners, until next time, go manage like a leader.
Thanks for being part of this community of revolutionary leaders who believe honest communication, healthy conflict, and building cultures of acceptance, respect, and trust are not only possible, but non-negotiable for cultivating world-class teams. If one-to-one coaching, engaging workshops, or strategic planning that is actually useful are anything that interests you, make sure to head over to transcendleadershipcollective.com to check out our free resources. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is hosted by Lacey Nelson and produced by Mary Scott. Music is by Leif Olson and Mary Scott from the band The Number of Months. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review. And until next time, go manage like a leader.